Hi, it's Jess, and you're listening to or watching another episode of the Flaky Foodie podcast, the only show where the discussion is delicious and there's chatter to chew on. Today, I have with me Nicole A Taylor. She's an accomplished food writer and author. She's been nominated for one of the most prestigious awards in the culinary world, a James Beard Award, and she's the author of 3 cookbooks: Up South, the OG Cookbook, and the cookbook that we're going to talk about today is the cookbook for Juneteenth, watermelon, and Redbirds. Now, I've enjoyed thumbing through this. I've made tea cakes, but kind of how did this cookbook come to be?
Jess, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. Wow, this cookbook, it's fun because there are 2 versions of the story, right? First is that, over the last decade plus, I've been celebrating Juneteenth and writing about Juneteenth or producing content around Juneteenth. And agent basically gave me the nudge and said this would be a great cookbook. And it was around 2018 when she said this, and I started in earnest working on the book. That's one. Story number 2 is that so many anecdotes and things that I talk about in the essays and head notes in this cookbook are centered around Juneteenth, but they're centered around how I've entertained people. Someone told me not to use the word entertain. How I've hosted people and celebrated in the summertime since, I was in my 20s. So you're talking about 20 plus years. So this cookbook has been in me for a long time. And it's the way that I cook during the summer months. It's the way that I sometimes throughout the year. And how I celebrate important days like Juneteenth or special occasions in my life and in my family and friends' lives.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit more about your background as a person. I know from your book Up South, that was kind of inspired by your move to Brooklyn. You grew up kind of in Athens and Atlanta, Georgia, so deep Southern roots.
Oh
So
yeah.
can you tell me more about that? Like, how did you start cooking?
Yeah. So I grew up in a college town, Athens, Georgia. I think I heard you say before are you in Tallahassee?
Yes.
Uh, Tallahassee is much like Athens.
Mm,
The whole entire city revolves around the University of Georgia.
mm. Can definitely understand
The
that.
students, yeah, the students are a big part of life here. Athens is 60 miles north of Atlanta. I grew up in a working class family. My mother worked for chicken poultry for more than 40 years, but I also was raised by my 2 aunts and uncles in what I call the homes, in a neighborhood that's now called Chicopee Dudley.
Mm,
It is a neighborhood where I saw Black people and Black life in a very inspiring, positive, fun, loving way. My next door neighbor became the first Black city councilwoman
oh,
in
awesome.
Athens, Miriam Moore. My neighbor across the street worked at the cleaners for like 4 years. You move up the street a bit, some of the most engaging and popular Black school teachers lived in my neighborhood. So I grew up seeing Black life in many ways, and Black men and Black women taking care of their families and taking care of their neighborhoods. um, I learned how to cook by watching people, right? I'm the person that I feel like if I sit down and watch you just make something and I watch you closely more than 1 or 2 times, I can almost recreate that. I will pay attention to little things or how you move and how you do things. And I learned to cook as a young person. Before I was a teenager, I could food or was making food or getting in trouble for having the oven or the stove on when I was
Mm.
home. And finally everybody was like, just let her do her thing. Um, so yeah, that's my background. I mean, I left Athens and went to college in Atlanta. Diversity. And I recently wrote about how Athens and Atlanta informed the way I eat and the way I cook for Resi. Resi is a reservation app that we use to make reservations in most popular restaurants around the country. And they have beautiful editorial side. And I got right about how growing up in Athens and becoming a young adult in Atlanta really shaped how I view food, how I make food, and how I eat out. So, yeah, I lived in Atlanta for a bit and then moved to New York in 2008. And that's really where I realized, like, oh, I could be a full-time food person. And so in 2008, I moved, or my husband and I moved to New York City, but I definitely wasn't calling myself a food writer. I knew I was obsessed with food. Mm-hmm. I kind of was thinking I could do a career in food, but I wasn't sure. But what I did start doing is the same thing I did in Atlanta. I had this long list of restaurants and places that I wanted to try or markets I wanted to visit. And I was working at a nonprofit when I first, an environmental nonprofit. And I would get off work and I would, even if I didn't have money to eat at a spot, I would at least just go out and look at the menu or walk in and order a drink or order one app. So I immersed myself in New York City food culture on my own, kind of self-made. Started doing a podcast, same thing. I've taught myself a lot. I came up, as they say, through the mud in food media. But here I am, I did it, I would say, the non-traditional way for a long time. I was aching and trying to work at one of the glossy food magazines. And now, does that even matter? They don't even exist barely, but I am blessed to be able to have, at this point, start a career in earnest in like 2008. And now, on the other side, I have 3 cookbooks. I've written for, pretty much every major food publication, newspapers such as the New York Times. And I've been able to write about Black culture mainly, but I've written about other things as well, like maple sugar. I've written about some of my favorite restaurants opening for food and wine, The Fly in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. So that's kind of the girl from, small town Georgia, how she, rose up through the ranks of food media.
So you mentioned that you watched your family members cook when you were growing up. Mm-hmm. And so was there a lot of entertaining like you have in the Juneteenth cookbook that you kind of modeled your recipes after? Or was this something that you kind of learned being out on your own?
Well, that's funny as you asked that question, because I immediately started thinking about my cousin Tammy Gartrell. She is, growing up, she's one of my favorite cousins. She's 10 years older than me, and her mother and father, Tom and Bunny Gartrell, I mentioned them in my first book, and I mentioned them in the Juneteenth cookbook. They worked at a sorority house for more than 50 years as cooks, and they were the house in my family, in our community, where all of the hosting, the parties, the family get-togethers happen. I learned how to make people feel good, how to make my house their house from watching them. Mm-hmm. They were the ultimate hosts. They were the ultimate people who not only fixed you a whole meal, people would just show up and all of a sudden a whole meal would appear. But they also knew how to pull the brown liquor out. They understood how to be a place for the preacher, and mm-hmm. how to be a place for the cousin who's always drunk, who was sloppy drunk, how to entertain him and feed him as well. So I would say, hands down, they were more like aunts and uncles to me. They're actually my mom's first cousins. They've since transitioned, But I would say that is where I learned how to provide a safe space, a place of love, a place of joy, and a place of pure love. I learned that from them.
Awesome. So about Juneteenth, you mentioned that you got the idea for this cookbook when your publisher kind of mentioned it to you. So did you celebrate Juneteenth a lot before then, or did you just kind of start looking into Juneteenth once you got the notion to write the cookbook?
Oh no. No. I was celebrating Juneteenth.
Awesome.
I was celebrating Juneteenth because I attended a Juneteenth festival, outdoor festival in Brooklyn more than 10 years ago. And it was in the middle of the Fort Greene neighborhood in a park. It was a Black nonprofit organization doing their 13th annual Juneteenth celebration. There was a stage, there were young people performing, a band, there were food vendors, and there was a Black man dressed in cowboy attire with the pony giving kids pony rides. And the kids were so happy. I had one photo from that day and I have a big smile on my face. I'm like, wow, I want to celebrate Juneteenth. I want to make Juneteenth a part of my annual tradition. And that's when I started doing it. And then I started writing about it. And that's when my agent said, you should write a book on Juneteenth. And I actually deleted her email because I said, I'm not from Texas. I'm not the person to write this. And I thought the holiday was too niche. But she, she saw something. She saw that the importance of the holiday. But no, I've been celebrating it. I've celebrated it on a rooftop with some of my dearest friends. And we had, real fancy food. Well, fancy meaning like it was plated and we passed it around. I've helped Brownsville Community Center and Culinary Cafe host a Juneteenth event and tour with Chef BJ Dennis. I've done over the last decade. I have a whole list of every single thing I've done on Juneteenth, but never with the intent that I was going to write a book about it. I didn't even think that I had enough recipes or enough stories to talk about Juneteenth. But when I sat down, I'm like, oh, nah. I probably got enough for like 3 books.
Well, this is definitely like an anthology where you can cook for a meal from beginning to end for almost every Black occasion. There's a recipe here. And how did you celebrate Juneteenth this year?
Oh, wow. How did I
And what was on the table?
Yes, I'll start with what was on the table. So I celebrated Juneteenth in my hometown. And I did that on purpose. There were plenty of organizations who were emailing saying, hey, come here. But I really wanted to ground myself in home. And I wanted to ground myself in the place where I spent most of the time writing this cookbook. So for food, there are friends that came from out of town. So one of my friends, Kia, who owns Milk Glass Pie, she brought a bunch of pies. So the day of Juneteenth, in the evening or afternoon, we had an outdoor pie social, which I thought was really cool. And it wasn't even on purpose. It was kind of like, she was like, I'm gonna bring a bunch of pies. So she had like a buttermilk pie, with raspberry, like a peach pie. It was scones, cookies. And I was like, let's bring it outside. So we had an outdoor pie social. And the day before Juneteenth, the actual June 19th, that Saturday on the 18th, we grilled out. My husband got on the grill. I micromanaged him on the grill. We had chicken burgers, which is one of my favorite recipes. It's the actual recipe that I did a cooking demo on the Today Show with Craig Melvin. Excuse me. So we had, normal cookout barbecue stuff on the 18th. Also, that whole weekend, starting on that Thursday, if I go backwards, I did a book signing at the only locally owned bookstore here in Athens. It was like 103 degrees.
Oh
So
my goodness.
we had to change venues because originally it was going to be outside and we went to an inside venue. But one of my favorite kombucha companies here in Athens did a hibiscus float. So we had hibiscus kombucha with this coconut sorbet on the top. And it totally was like, the red punch when your grandmama, your aunt put that sorbet on the top. So that was super fun. And then that next day, that Friday, the Plate Sale, which is a Black-owned dinner lunch experience run by Mike and Sharitha Sheets, they hosted a happy hour for me in honor of the book. So we had like homemade bologna sandwiches at happy hour. We had drinks, wine sponsored by Black Girl Magic Wine, their sparkling brut. The whole weekend was like Juneteenth foods, red punch, cookout, grill food. It was so beautiful. I'm like, was that just a month ago? Can I recreate that now?
Yes, Juneteenth Part 2, 4th of July. Juneteenth Part 3, Labor Day.
I mean,
just
listen,
keep it going.
Listen, and that has what you just described literally is what I did this past 4th of July. It was Juneteenth Part 2. It literally, I saw 2 old friends that I hadn't seen in definitely 10 plus years and saw their kids. Last time I saw their kids, they were in like car seats and now they're teenagers. So I had a very beautiful July 4th weekend, which was my Juneteenth Part 2. It was bittersweet. It was, Juneteenth was very similar to some of the things that I write about in the Juneteenth book, where, Black people, we always have this juxtaposition with joy and sorrow, right?
Yes.
Or craving grade A liberty and all its bittersweetness. And that's what this past weekend was like for me. It was joyful because I got to relax and spend time with friends, but it wasn't lost on me like all the things that have been happening over the last 2 weeks. And so, for me, it was important to take this past weekend and not say, I'm not celebrating 4th of July. And I can't necessarily say that I was celebrating 4th of July, but I was celebrating the spirit of my ancestors. And that is wanting a better life for me. And that better life includes rest, restoration, a better word to say restoration, resilience, and personal freedom and liberty. So that's what I did this past weekend with plenty of food.
Do you feel like any extra pressure since you're, the author of this Juneteenth cookbook? You've become kind of representational of the holiday since you have this body of work out. Do you feel any additional pressure to bring the heat on Juneteenth or any other kind of Black holiday for that matter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, because 2 reasons why. I feel pressure because, listen, I wrote the first cookbook dedicated to the Juneteenth holiday by a major publisher, right? I know that there are plenty of people probably have written community books around Juneteenth or have written about Juneteenth. Some of my colleagues like Donald Battle Pierce, she's written about Juneteenth, and Tony Tipton Martin. But there is pressure because I am writing about Juneteenth through a different lens, from a very modern lens. And I want to make sure that my recipes are reflective of the past, but also look towards the future. So that's a lot of pressure because people critique you. And it's pressure for me because people make my recipes and they want to be like, did this taste the same? And ultimately, when I'm making food for my family and friends, I want them to love the food. So I think regardless if it was a cookbook or not, that I definitely always have pressure to make great food. because I want people to have a memorable experience when they're at my home. But then adding a cookbook on top, people, they want us most times now, definitely over the past month or so, they've showed up and they're like, is this from the cookbook? So I always make more than one things from the cookbook. I've always done that because the stuff in the cookbook is what I make. I mean, I can do it by rote. So yeah, there is pressure. There's going to be pressure probably for the next several years on Juneteenth for me to show up in a way where I'm giving to other people. And I'm okay with that.
So how did your research process for the book go? I know you said you already kind of wrote about Juneteenth before, but not being necessarily from Texas, where the holiday originated, how was your research process? About how long did that take before the cookbook came to be?
Well, I would say a few things is that, June 19th, 1865, also known as Juneteenth, is a holiday that's rooted in Texas, a holiday that, got its legs in Galveston, but we know that Black people left the American South, and more specifically, Black people left Texas. And when they left Texas, they took Juneteenth with them. So you find people from Texas who celebrated Juneteenth for generations. You find them in Atlanta, you find them in LA, you find them in Oakland, you find them in Seattle. And so I spoke with people one specific person I spoke with was Marguerite Hannah, born and raised in Galveston, lives in Atlanta, went to school in Howard, from a very prominent Black family in Galveston. Her grandfather was Mr. T.D. Armstrong, who owned a pharmacy there, owned real estate, and was, a contributor to Black life and culture in Galveston. But I spoke with her. She is a person who, after speaking with her, I'm like, okay, she gave me permission to write this book, right? And saying that it's okay. And also too, she gave me permission to do things the way I wanted to. But yeah, so I spoke to people who celebrated Juneteenth, who are from Texas. I also did a lot of reading from cookbooks and many things that weren't cookbooks, looking for cultural cues about Texas food, about Black Texans, about Juneteenth. I also looked at Black cookbooks to see the correlation between foods, traditional foods people ate at Juneteenth, and just general Black, what I call celebration foods. What do we eat at celebratory times? I listened to a lot of music as well, and looked at a lot of art when I could, because I started deep research in this book in the pandemic, right in 2020, in the summer of 2020. And I was working on this book all the way up until March when it went to the printer, March of this year. And so I have a section in the back of the book called Notes on Juneteenth. I call it the poor man's bibliography. And it's not even the extensive list of who I talked to, what I read. For instance, I read and went through How to Be by Harriet Cole. That book came out in the early 2000s. And she has like 2 paragraphs talking about Juneteenth celebrations. So I went to my shelf and just kind of looked at Black books that I thought would be some references around Juneteenth. But the research was not just one road. There were so many different paths that led to creating chapters. One, like the festival and fairs chapter. I was really interested in creating a chapter that focused on what I call Americana summertime foods, which are fair foods like funnel cakes and fried fish and shrimp, where you find Black coastal cities, particularly like Galveston. That's what they had at Juneteenth. They would have fried fish, fried shrimp. You see fish fries too, happened all over the country. But when I started researching about the fairs and festivals, I went down this rabbit hole of reading about the desegregation of the Texas State Fair in Dallas. Whoa, I could like do a whole article about the Texas State Fair. I end up, writing an essay that kind of gave you the gist of the desegregation of the fair. But yeah, that research, I was like researching that fair for like a whole week. And I'm like, wait, wait. Come on back. Because I'm not a historian, I'm a person who is a master home cook that writes about Black culture. And I like to say I'm leaving breadcrumbs for people to do a deeper dive. But yeah, the research is very exhilarating for me.
When you were coming up with recipes, what's one to where you were kind of putting it together for the book and you're like, that's Juneteenth in a nutshell? It kind of envelops how I like to celebrate it, how I've celebrated. Was one or maybe 2 or 3 recipes that you feel kind of encapsulate Juneteenth?
That's a good question. I feel like the rub, the all-purpose rub in the book is really Juneteenth to me. And I will say because ribs and barbecued food or cookout foods, you can't have Juneteenth without the smoke, right? People want a burger, people want ribs, people want meat. They want to be outside, they want to taste that smoke. And so this all-purpose rub, I perfected it and tweaked it over the years, but I feel like it's the thing that I'm always going to have in the summertime when I'm grilling food out. My husband is actually putting the food out and I'm micromanaging him. I'm always going to create my rubs and use them the whole summer. So that rub, which is in the front part of the chapter, is what I would say is crucial to me telling my story of Juneteenth. And desserts. Oh my gosh, I am a dessert person.
Me
so
too.
I have 2 chapters dedicated to desserts, and I feel like ice cream is a story that so many people making homemade ice cream, people from the South of a certain age. I've gotten 3 different people tell me the story of in the summertime they would have a big wooden ice cream maker with the rock ice, and their grandparents or their family members would let all the kids, turn the churn, and it would be on Juneteenth. So I've heard that story from 3 different people. And so as I've been promoting this book, and it was just confirmation, like having a whole chapter and having homemade ice cream in this book, in my way, in a very modern way, also speaks to the traditions of so many Black people across the United States, and particularly Black Texans who had and enjoyed homemade ice cream on Juneteenth. So the honey vanilla ice cream is a beautiful ode to Juneteenth stories of ice cream making and the future of desserts on Juneteenth.
So something that I noticed from the book was the beautiful use of summer produce, which, I'm from Florida. We have wonderful produce here in Florida, especially during the summertime. So there's things like fresh corn and zucchini and eggplant. So how important is fresh produce kind of to the celebration of Juneteenth?
Oh my gosh. Like when I was growing up, the summertime meant that the fruit man was going to come through the neighborhood. He was going to have watermelon, and the grown-ups would run outside because the vegetable / fruit man would come, and they wanted to get the summer bounty off of the vegetable man's truck, right? And I remember going to the grocery store in the summertime, and as soon as you walk in, you see these big cartons with watermelons coming out, right? And you knew that when someone bought their watermelon, and you got home, you just weren't gonna cut a watermelon for one person. You know, it became a communal thing. And also in the summertime, you know, you're driving somewhere and there's a roadside stand and you get corn and you get tomatoes. Or in my neighborhood, everyone had a garden. And I remember getting yelled at from neighbors because I would cut through their yards to go to my cousin's house, trampling their summertime fruits and vegetables. So it is a part of American culture, the American South culture, to have tomatoes, corn, eggplants, fresh herbs, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries in the summertime. And so I started this book, the ideation of this book, thinking about what are the fruits and vegetables that I can recall that naturally come to my mind when I think of summer months and when I think of Juneteenth. And I literally started a spreadsheet, right? And from that spreadsheet, I wanted to like, how can I tell the story of the summer bounty? How can I tell the story of someone's great aunt who always kept a garden? Or how can I tell the story of someone always stopping at a farm stand? So that's what you see throughout the book in the recipes. You see fruits that conjure up a memory. You also see a food pyramid in the beginning of the book that literally gives you an example of, you know, fruits, vegetables, and accoutrements that you should be shopping for this cookbook. So yeah, that the fruits and vegetables, summertime fruits and vegetables were paramount when I was creating these recipes.
So let's talk a little bit more about that food pyramid. You did a wonderful interview with the National African American History Museum.
Yeah.
And you talk a little bit about how there's some kind of almost like a duality between your food pyramid and some of W.E.B. Du Bois' work. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, such a coincidence. The creative director of my book is George McCallman. George is a San Francisco-based illustrator and artist. He has designed a few cookbooks. Probably one of the most notable cookbooks he's designed this year is Black Food by Brian Terry. But he also, I was lucky enough to have him design my book. So the cover of my book, the color, the illustrations in my book, it's all George. And I had this idea that I wanted to do a food pyramid. And George was like, okay, tell me what you want to do. He was like, better yet, just draw it and send me a picture. I'm like, I can't draw. I'm not an artist. But I just, you know, sent him a little thing in my moleskin. And he used color pencils in the first printing of the book. And then we just put the words on there. Now, in the second printing of the book that's supposed to happen, he has some hand-drawn words of the fruits and the vegetables and the herbs. And then we printed out this 5x7 archival print of the pyramid, and it's George. And so when we were printing this out, the book had long gone to the printer, the book was out. I was just looking through some of my husband's art books, and he has this book that chronicles W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois's research around Black Atlantans, Black people in Georgia at the turn of the century. And he has all these diagrams. They're pyramids, they're circles, and I open it up and literally there's a pyramid, colorful, that looks almost similar to what George and I put together. And I sent it to George and he was like, ha. My husband said, was George inspired by this? So I sent him a text. He was like, no, but he's like, it's so funny. He's like, I've been saying for years, I'm going to buy that book and I haven't bought it. And he's like, I'm going to buy it now. I was like, yeah, it's totally the ancestors speaking through me. But it is a coincidence that they look so much alike in terms of color, in terms of, you know, the simple idea that we were conveying. So yeah, I'm happy to have been on that same wavelength with Dr. E.B. Du Bois.
That is amazing. So the title of the book also kind of has mention of the ancestors kind of hidden within it, watermelon and redbirds. Can you tell me a little bit more about the title of that book and of the book and what it means?
Yeah. I mean, watermelon, we talked a bit about it. Like, watermelon to me means summertime. It
Mm-hmm.
signifies Americana. It also signifies, Black people in a very positive way. And redbirds, wow. I get chills every time I get this question. I just get chills thinking about it. My mother used to tell me growing up, she would be like, look outside, look outside. And I'll look outside and she'd be like, there's a red bird. There's somebody that died in our family coming back to say hello, blow them a kiss. And I always would see a red bird and be like, oh, that's somebody in my family coming back to say hello. It's good luck. I remember that story. I had to be a little girl. I remembered that story right when I started to think about what the title of this book should be. I never forgot the story, but it wasn't on my mind. And I never really saw redbirds a lot in New York. And I was like, this needs to be the title of my book. It is the perfect summation of the past, the present, and the future of Juneteenth. And when I came back to Georgia to create this book and to take a break from the COVID-19 pandemic, and I would look out my window and I have a stressful day, I would see a red bird. I see so many red birds now, and they're just like lingering and flying around. And I always just go, thank you, thank you, thank you, ancestors. And even now, I start to call out people's names. Like, is that you? Is that you, Aunt Bessie Goolsby? And so, yeah, the title is special to me.
Yes. So you just mentioned Aunt Bessie, and you mentioned in that interview also about how she kind of taught you to cook, or you watched her cook, and she kind of supervised your first recipe in the kitchen, which was fried corn. So do you remember that recipe and how it tasted? Do you still make it to this day?
Well, it's funny because I don't think, okay, did I say she supervised that? So my Aunt Bessie Goolsby, she lived to be almost 100 years old. I mean, she was my great aunt. She's more like a grandmother to me. And it's funny because she was matriarch of our family. Everyone looked at her, but she could cook. The first thing that I saw her cook and I recreated was actually a poached egg.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, she used to make poached egg all the time. She could really cook. She could make great yeast rolls, and she drank a Coca-Cola every day. But I learned I can't recall if she taught me how to make fried corn or where I learned that from, but yes, I was young. I wasn't even a teenager, and I would cut that fat back off. And I would have that big black cast iron pan, and I would, take the fat back out, put it on a piece of um, paper, let it drain out. That was going to be on the side, and shuck the corn, cut the corn off, and fry the corn. Some people call that cream corn now, but yes, I still make that. I have a recipe in my first cookbook, but it's funny. I think I learned how to make fried corn just seeing other women doing the same thing. I don't remember my Aunt Bessie Goolsby making fried corn that much.
Okay. So for your son, I know he's a little one now,
Yeah.
but do you have plans to kind of have him watch you in the kitchen as well?
He watches me now.
Okay.
Yeah, my son is 3.5 years old. His name is Garvey. I am so proud when we go to the grocery store and he comes in the kitchen and he sees an avocado and he goes, avocado. Or he'll get up in the morning and was like, what do you want for breakfast? And he's like, mango. And I don't have any mangoes. And he'll just start calling out fruits and vegetables because he sees all the fruits and vegetables on the counter. So it's not foreign to him, right? And so I'm proud of that. And he loves making eggs. He loves eggs. And so I let him crack his own eggs. Sometimes they fall on the floor and the shells get in it, but I let him crack his own eggs. and make him scrambled eggs. I think it starts now, and he definitely will see a photo of someone in the kitchen and he'll go, "Mommy."
Just anybody in the kitchen is
Yes,
mommy.
yes, because he's seen me in the kitchen so much, and I'm proud of that. And I hope is my prayer that he will create memories and family and friends and food the same way I have, and he'll have these 3 cookbooks as a guide to enjoyment and to laughter.
So we talked briefly about how the title Watermelon and Redbirds, especially the Redbirds part, kind of has Juneteenth's past, present, and future kind of wrapped up in it. What do you kind of envision the future of Juneteenth to be? Right now, we're kind of in a state where more people are finding out about it across the nation who may not have celebrated it before. How do you kind of envision the future of Juneteenth?
I am freaking excited about Juneteenth. I feel that Juneteenth will always be ours. And when I say that, what I mean is that no one can take Black American story of family, can take them from us. Your story about your family and growing up in Florida or growing up in Milwaukee or me growing up in Athens, no one can strip that away from me. And I'm mostly excited about people asking folks in their family, did you celebrate Juneteenth? Or tell me about Auntie Susie potato salad. Why didn't nobody know how to make it? I want to learn how to make it. I think that that's what Juneteenth is going to look like. It's going to be people, Black people, digging deeper into their family stories. And with those family stories comes food and food traditions. And so I'm most excited about that. All the other stuff to me is just noise, right? Because I know that Black people, there's so many things in our culture that have stood the test of time. And I know in my heart that Juneteenth is an American holiday. It is a Black American holiday, and the future is bright. I'm also excited about the plethora of Juneteenth cookbooks that are going to come after mine. Like, hello, people. Like, there should be an entire Juneteenth cocktail book or dessert book. And it should be by someone from Texas who's been celebrating it for Juneteenth, for centuries, excuse me. Or centuries is not the wrong word. It was the wrong word, for decades. I'm excited about that. So things are bright for Juneteenth, for sure.
So a lot of African Americans now are going into meatless diets, vegan diets. For one, I'm pescatarian, and I'm very grateful for the inclusion of the zucchini dogs and also the meatless baked beans.
I made the meatless baked beans this weekend.
Yeah.
People love them.
Mm-hmm. So do you kind of picture more of like a plant-based kind of experience for Black folks, culinary experience for Black people?
I think that more people, more African Americans are incorporating plant-based or vegetarian side dishes or main dishes into their celebrations. I think it's becoming just a mainstay. For me, I always keep Impossible Burgers in my freezer. So if when I'm cooking out for a celebration or Juneteenth, if I forget that someone is vegan, I can pull out an Impossible Burger. But even more so, my mushrooms. I always have what I call fancy mushrooms in some form for a celebration. I will fry them up and use the same batter that I use for my fish sometimes. I will use my dry rub and put them on the grill. As you see in the cookout and barbecue section, I'm always thinking about how to incorporate vegetarian and vegan dishes into my celebrations, because I have so many friends who are, eating less meat and or have decided to mostly eat a plant-based diet. So it's natural to me. And I also was vegetarian for about 10 years. We're pescatarian and my husband was vegetarian. So it's easy for me just to do it, not even think about it. Every now and then I would slip up and like have like Worcestershire sauce and something, and I forget like, oh wait,
the fish in there,
the fish. And but you can buy non what do you want to call it, vegan Worcestershire sauce, I guess that's the best way to say it. Yeah, so there are plenty of ways to switch that out, but to answer your question, yes. people are already doing it.
So beyond Juneteenth, how do you kind of envision your cookbook being used through like the other months throughout the year?
Well, I mean, it's the summertime. We outside. Hashtag.
Yes.
I mean, for me this summer, I'm mostly excited about going on vacation with friends. And I'm excited about, going on a hike with friends. And I'm excited about being back in New York and doing a block party. And so for those three things that I just mentioned, you can use watermelon and Redbirds. The margarita mix, the maroon margarita mix is so perfect to mix up, put it in your cooler, have your ice ready, ask someone to bring the booze if you're drinking booze, or ask someone to bring the tonic, and you just put a little mix in the cup, put your tonic in, or put your Dillion in if that's what you want, shake it up, and boom, you have a cocktail. You can do that on a camping trip or outdoor picnic at a park. When I'm going on vacation in August, I'm already thinking about like, okay, I'm going to be on Martha's Vineyard. It's going to be a ton of fish. I'm going to do the caraway butterfish at our rental house for everyone. It's easy. I can just buy the caraway seeds and the butter, and I'll get the guys to cook that out. There's so many we outside things that are happening this summer that you can bring my recipes too, or you can just make them at home while you're chilling. These next 2.5 months or 3 months of warm weather, depending on where you are, longer, we should be enjoying ourselves. We should like turn the TV off, close our phones, forget about social media, and like be with family and friends. Like, it's been a crazy 2.5 years, right? We've just basically been scared to touch anyone, to be around people. So I'm excited to safely be gathering with family and friends and eating well.
Yes. Well, we thank you so much for being a part of the show, Nicole. I have thoroughly enjoyed having you here in this conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed the cookbook. So again, thank you so much for being a part of it.
Thank you so much. I'm a bit rusty. It's been 2 weeks since I've been on the a few weeks since I've been on the interview circuit, but I'm happy to be on your podcast.
Yes. So if people kind of want to follow you and what you have coming up next, where can they follow you?
Check me out. I can be found everywhere on social media. Food Culturist, CULTURIST. Yeah. I'm going to be outside all summer long.
And if you want to buy the book, you can find it anywhere you find books, especially at your local independent or Black-owned bookstores. So make sure you check out Watermelon and Redbirds. And again, thank you so much for being here. I am Jess with the Flaky Foodie. Remember, eat something delicious this week and treat this episode like gossip or the gospel and tell somebody about it. All right, everybody. Thanks. Bye.